USIP, 31st of May 2023, Why the China-India border conflict should concern us all. The December 2022 skirmish between Chinese and Indian forces over the 2,100-mile-long Line of Actual Control, LAC, the two nations' disputed boundary, demonstrates a concerning one-step forward, two steps back pattern. Since fighting in the Galwan Valley claimed the lives of 20 Indian and at least 4 Chinese soldiers in 2020, this brawl has been the worst. Both parties have been militarizing their border policy even though those conflicts frequently endings and other measures to ease tensions. Beijing and New Delhi are tightening their postures on either side of the LAC, which raises the possibility of escalating tensions between the two nuclear-armed nations. As a result, the situation on the border is still tense. Given the general trend of the Sino-Indian relationship, which has deteriorated dramatically in recent years, tensions over the border dispute are mainly cause for concern. Beijing and New Delhi must overcome several obstacles to settle their long-standing differences, many of which were only made worse by these recent skirmishes. These include militarization of the border, an assertive foreign policy by India, and rising dangers to the strategic stability of the area. Army construction around the border. Following the Galwan incident, the two sides engaged in 18 rounds of discussions at the Corps commander level, which resulted in a constrained pullback of forces and the establishment of military buffer zones. Indeed, these discussions prevented unwarranted escalation, which is an accomplishment that shouldn't be underrated. While a sizable contingent of forces has remained close to the border, the disengagement has only been minimal. No significant progress was made in the most recent round of negotiations. Since 2020, both sides have extended their respective footholds along the border despite numerous disengagement agreements, adding new combined arms battalions and new infrastructure. Mainly China has concentrated on developing the infrastructure along the LAC. A land boundaries law adopted by China's legislature in 2021 states that the government must promote coordination between border defense and social, economic development in border areas. China has built a sizable amount of civilian and military infrastructure close to the border by this directive. Since the 2020 Galwan conflict, the People's Liberation Army, PLA, has maintained continuous force presence and continued infrastructure build-up along the LAC, according to the Pentagon's most recent China military power report. The most recent satellite images of the border zones support this. For instance, Xi's China Power pictures show a division-level headquarters built at Pangong Lake, near the Gagra Hot Springs, where troops withdrew last autumn. Commercial satellite imagery also reveals new facilities, including what appear to be barracks, in the Galwan Valley. These additional locations suggest a border area where Chinese armed forces are stationed permanently. The Indian military has also started to bolster its forces around the border. For instance, New Delhi transferred about 50,000 troops to the LAC in 2021. Additionally, the Indian Air Force is still operationally stationed close to the border. Infrastructure initiatives, such as plans to build 73 strategic roads along the LAC, including nearly 1,430 miles of road in the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh alone, where the clashes took place in December 2022 and which Beijing claims as southern Tibet, as well as several tunnels to speed up travel to border regions, support this forced increase. The Vibrant Villages campaign, launched by the Indian government this year, aims to develop vital infrastructure in towns on its side of the contentious border. Both sides are militarizing the border, which is a harsh fact. India has started shifting its army away from Pakistan and toward the LAC in response to a persistent and growing Chinese threat. As a result, in the upcoming year, we may anticipate both Chinese and Indian soldiers to be present in more significant and consistent numbers. And these new developments will serve as another obstacle to settling these ongoing conflicts. Wherever the Chinese are, India's more assertive foreign policy must wage a full-scale war. In general, New Delhi's foreign policy in recent years has been more focused on opposing Beijing than on engaging with other countries, and the border conflict has harmed the increasingly tense bilateral relations. As stated by both India's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, peace along the border is necessary for normalized relations. The Sino-Indian friendship warmed after the Cold War and included frequent high-level engagement. Both nations had the same views on several global problems, such as the need to change the multilateral international order, and as a result, bilateral commerce increased. Since the boundary dispute could be kept apart from the political and economic relationship, there would eventually be room to accommodate one another's interests and stabilize the bilateral relationship, according to a widespread view in Indian foreign policy circles. However, these presumptions have been questioned in the wake of the 2020 Galwan issue. In the economic sphere, New Delhi responded to Beijing's border violations by scrutinizing and sanctioning Chinese investments and businesses more closely. Following the 2020 conflict, India also outlawed other Chinese apps, including WeChat and TikTok. Since then, other bans have been implemented, preventing hundreds of Chinese apps from accessing the sizable Indian market. It has prioritized economic cooperation with other countries to lessen its reliance on China. This includes the Resilient Supply Chain Initiative with Japan and Australia and recent free trade agreements with the European Union and the United Kingdom. India's growing geopolitical ties with Western democracies have supported these adjustments to its economic relations with China. For instance, the defense trade between the United States and India increased from near zero in 2008 to over $20 billion in 2020. Washington and New Delhi recently established the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies to deepen their strategic technology relationship and industrial defense cooperation. Exercises like Tiger Triumph, Yuddhabhyas, and a Training Malabar, which now includes the fleets of Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, collectively known as the Quad, have all been regularized by the two forces. New Delhi has strengthened its ties with the US and other Indo-Pacific countries as it has become more antagonistic against Beijing. This also occurs when India and China face mounting economic difficulties and mistrust one another. Inevitably, New Delhi's new foreign policy course will run afoul of Chinese interests and present new management difficulties for border issues in 2023. Asia's strategic instability? Strategic stability in Asia is becoming more challenging to manage with tensions between China and India, Pakistan's political and economic unrest, and the resumption of great power competition. In response to perceived threats from their rivals, nuclear-armed powers China, India, and Pakistan are justifying improvements to their regional arsenals, creating a cascading security dilemma. This predicament increases the danger that border conflicts will escalate to nuclear war. During the 20th National Party Congress in the fall of last year, Chinese President Xi Jinping stated that his nation needed to develop a potent strategic deterrence system. Xi's comments reveal Beijing's shifting image of the world as unfavorable. With Beijing's growing nuclear arsenal and investments in cutting-edge delivery technologies, this new threat perception could encourage New Delhi's atomic buildup. At the very least, it will make the existing high levels of suspicion much more pronounced. Although nuclear use is still unlikely, border tensions exacerbate this risky situation. Infrastructure development and army patrols along the LAC could stimulate new conventional and nuclear military investments. These investments will probably lead to increased border tensions as a result. A function for the US? To maintain peace in the face of a dominant China. Conflicts along the LAC have recently been commonplace, and the Sino-Indian relationship is currently trending in a way that makes improvement unlikely. Both sides appear to be fortifying their positions close to the border rather than disengaging. Although Beijing has grown more implacable, New Delhi's foreign policy has become more forceful in its criticism of the Chinese government. There are still chances for Washington to contribute to bringing down the temperature along the Sino-Indian border, notwithstanding these tensions. First, Washington may and should express its support for New Delhi, but it must do so without further escalating the already tense situation. Such a calculated reaction will involve supporting India's de-escalation efforts while rejecting unilateral actions by any party to alter the territorial status quo. The US-India cooperation would benefit significantly from this consistent and assured assistance, especially in times of crisis. Second, the United States may provide equipment to support India's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities and valuable information and intelligence regarding Chinese movement in border regions. During the border conflict in Arunachal Pradesh in December 2022, the United States offered India this help. India could better prepare for the Chinese invasions because of its intelligence. The lessons learned from this occurrence can be a foundation for future teamwork. Joint intelligence reviews, where analysts from both nations collaborate to discuss the PLA's activities and intentions along the border, can help strengthen material pledges. Washington's move would actively and decisively assist New Delhi's situation without stoking hostilities or confusing the problem with current tensions in its relationship with China. Unfortunately, 2023 the disputed border will probably be determined by business as usual. Relationship structural difficulties between China and India are not expected to disappear soon, providing room for future conflicts. Although it is expected that Beijing and New Delhi will continue their military negotiations, it is unclear whether they will reach an agreement on a significant level of pullout. Additionally, many adjacent armies could get involved in a battle if an incident escalates into a crisis. Such a terrible prospect shouldn't be disregarded.